Well, look who it is. Not you, me, of course. Gosh, do you even remember me? Do you remember what I looked like before I started this video? Um, Folks, I want to apologize. I've been absent and I've been doing what needs to be done. Let's just put it that way. Okay. And so let's I just want to kind of come clean before we get into what we're going to talk about today, because honestly, it's been so long. It feels mad rusty. Like I have not skipped this many days. Even when I did my vacation, I don't think it was quite this long. So first of all, I want to thank those of you who have reached out over these last couple of weeks and sent me well wishes, and not only here but also in my guided meditation group, which I've missed 2 weeks of that too. I've received an outpouring of support, and I just want to recognize that, and I want to be thankful and grateful and tell you all how much that's meant to me. Okay. When I get messages from you, I've told you this before, but it's true. And especially when things are maybe, not going as comfortably as things can go in my life, because look, I mean, you see me here for a half hour a day, but there's another 23 and a half hours of my day that include a lot of, real life stuff. And sometimes that stuff gets a little overwhelming. And so, and that has been the case over these last couple of weeks. And so, I want to first thank you for the outpouring of support. Really, thank you. Like, really, thank you. And then I guess I'd like to just explain to you that, it's funny. I'm going to say this in my meditation later on. Tonight's the first night back after 2 weeks of missing, and I hope I even have a class to teach or to guide through a meditation tonight. It's okay if I don't. It's no big deal. But the thing is, one of the things I'm planning to tell them is that it's one thing. Like I've had to, one of the things that somebody wrote to me this morning or yesterday morning actually. He asked me if I'm practicing the things that I teach effectively. He used different wording to that than that, but that's the thing, right? Like I don't want you to think like, and this is really tricky for me, right? Because I don't want you all thinking like, well, I guess mindfulness doesn't really work that well if Art couldn't handle it and had to, take a couple of weeks off. I mean, how bad could it be, And so I want you to understand that there's one thing, like I have lived my life, I haven't been, locked up somewhere, for my own safety or any other reason, although it's been a rough couple of weeks, and so, but I've been able to manage, but there's a difference between using mindfulness to keep yourself well through a difficult experience. There's a difference between that and then teaching someone through that same experience, right? So please understand that yes, everything that I talk about here, every little bit of it is what I use every moment of every, of the last couple of weeks that I've used to help myself to maintain my equilibrium and my well-being, okay? But getting up here and getting the sort of energy and inspiration and motivation to actually do videos like this, that's a different question. That's a different pardon the squeak. That's a different that's a whole different thing, right? And so that's why a lot of times I do have to or not a lot of times, but sometimes it's going to come up that I have to take some time off, because I need to mend myself, right? I need to repair something that's been broken, right? And I have to heal a wound, right? And I know that there were times over the last couple of weeks where I'm like, well, I just can't do the podcast. I just got to tell everybody I'm not going to do the podcast for a while, until I can get over all of this, and that's a really interesting thing, right? Because because when do you get over something? Right. And it doesn't really work that way. Right. And so it's really a challenge here for me to commit to being here every day, but then also, have, a life, because the reality is that, not just have a life, but the reality is that my life, it was about 6 months ago now that I really just, even maybe more like 9 months, maybe even close. Yeah, about 9 months, I guess, that I realized that I even have this trauma, right? Like that's when it first kind of became clear to me that this is what's been, making me suffer for so long, right? And so while it seems like, again, I was tempted the other day to just send out an announcement to everybody, like the Art Burns, the Showing Up to Life podcast is done. We're not doing it anymore, right? And I was going to do that because it's like, how many times am I going to come back and say, oh, I was really, my trauma was triggered again and I had to take more time off. It's like, I feel like if I was saying that to an employer, it'd be like, I got to resign. Like, I just can't do this, And so that actually kind of leads me to a question that I want to ask all of you. And so maybe some of you can sort of, reply back in a comment or send me an email at art@artburnscoaching.com. Or some of you have my cell phone number. You can send me a text or get me on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. Anyhow you want to get to me, let me know what you would prefer, because I am seriously considering perhaps doing a once a week podcast instead of an everyday podcast, right? And what would happen in the once a week podcast is that, the episodes would be a lot more sort of deep, right? Like I would be able to kind of really prepare something that's going to be a little bit more, have a little more substance, a little more depth to it, perhaps, right? It's going to be a little less spontaneous than what we have now. So that's the thing. There's always going to be a give and a take, right? And so I'm wondering if you all would prefer to have like a once a week podcast that you could guarantee, because then what I could do is I could record like 4 or 5 episodes ahead, right? And so have like a little stash of episodes here. So in the event that I need a couple of weeks to, deal with my trauma or whatever it is, I can do that, but still have, I could still publish episodes, right? Can't really do that on day to day, because I'm recording every day already. So when am I going to record the extra episodes, right? So it's a choice of, do we want that or is it okay to do every day? But know that sometimes it's going to be a couple of weeks, in between episodes. Sometimes, it doesn't happen a lot, but again, I don't know how long it's going to take me to get to the point where I'm no longer triggered in the ways that I've been triggered, these past couple of weeks. And then a few weeks ago, there was another period where I missed a few days and, let me know what you think. Let me know what you would prefer, right? So now, as far as today's episode is concerned, and again, this feels really, really awkward, and I want to honor that, right? Because it's weird, right? And I don't really have anything prepared. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I was ready to do this today, right? Because I'm still feeling like very, here's how I'm feeling, okay? And this is important because I think this is part of mindfulness, right? Now, a lot of times when we feel grief, right? Because that's what I'm feeling. It feels like I'm feeling grief, right? Because for my whole life, I would, I was living my life and certainly not well, right? I've been very honest about a lot of different issues I've had in my life. I had extraordinary anger issues throughout my whole life. I've had extraordinary social anxiety throughout my whole life. I've had which these are things that people don't believe about me because it doesn't show, right? Unless you're close to me. That's how these kind of things usually manifest, right? Or if you knew any of the people who worked for me, up till about 4 or 5 years ago, you would have had plenty of people saying, no, I've seen the anger, I've seen all that. Right. But many people don't see it. Right. And so anyway, I always thought that, and also, there's been financial issues. There's been substance abuse issues. There's been, cheating and lying issues. There's been, all kinds of, issues throughout my life, and I always just sort of thought that these things were just, it's just luck of the draw. It's just the way that I am. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. It's just the way I am, right? And that's a hard thing to deal with, right? That's a hard thing to sort of understand. And so what you do is you don't understand it, right? You avoid it. You just classic escape and avoid. You just, occupy yourself with stuff. right? And that's where I became a workaholic. I became an alcoholic. I became a womanizer. What do you call it? Philanderer, right? Which ironically is something in my genes. I recently found out as part of this journey in understanding my trauma, and I did work with a coach who put me through this really specific 8-week program designed to understand and heal from trauma to some extent, right? And so part of that and part of just my own journey, I've been looking into what's happened with my ancestors, right? Because the trauma is not something that just it doesn't appear out of nowhere. There's usually generational signs of what's been going on. And sure enough, my great-grandfather, who I never heard anything about, I think I mentioned this here on a previous episode, I never knew anything about the guy. We were all just told, oh, he died, nobody knew him, that kind of thing. But the reality is that when my grandmother was, probably about 10 years old or something, her mother, my grandmother had 3 sisters, her mother threw her father out of the house. She said, you cannot be around the girls with the philandering and the drinking all the time and all that stuff. He sounded just like my father. He sounded just like me, right? And so this is how things work, right? That it is generational, right? And so anyway, what I was trying to kind of I actually lost what I was going to say, pardon me. But I think what I want to say is that the trauma, it feels like I just ripped open a wound, and it feels just like it's like, holy crap, Oh, I remember now. I was getting to grief, right? And grieving because, as I said, I always thought that I was just a bad person. I was just like, I just had bad juju, and so I was, drinking, philandering, and it turns out that that's true, right? Like it's part of me. It's in my nervous system. It's in my DNA. It's in my essence that has been handed down from generation to generation, right? And I cannot deny that. And I cannot, I can't run from that. But what I can do is I can bring awareness to that and I can change it. And we'll get to that in a second. But the important thing that I want to explain now, or what I'm trying to explain now, whether it's important to you or not, what I'm trying to explain now is that, having thought throughout my whole life, because one of the things that happens with trauma is that there's a memory loss. So, well, it's an interesting thing that happens with trauma, with memory, actually, because there's one form of memory that's very absent in trauma, and that's explicit memory, right? Like, and I've realized this now, now that people have called attention to this and told me that, yeah, when you've experienced trauma as a child, you're going to have big blocks of your life that you just have no memory. Like, and I never thought that I had that before, but now that I'm looking back, like, I remember like maybe 2 teachers out of the first, 8 years of school. There's only 2 of them, maybe 3 or 4. Now that I'm thinking, 5, 6, maybe, but by no means do I have a memory of like, like I don't remember any of the friends that I had in 3rd grade. I remember a couple, like I remember the kids that I cut school with, right? Like those were the, like one time when we were all like in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, I think it was, I convinced these 2 other kids to cut a class, and thinking they weren't going to turn the school over, trying to find a couple of, pardon oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. But I've been watching a lot of media lately, and so a lot of potty mouth out there, but pardon me for that. That's not how we roll here on the Showing Up to Life podcast. We show up respectfully, but I thinking at the time that the school wasn't going to turn the whole school over and search for 3 missing 10-year-old kids, like where I thought, who knows. But anyway, I don't have a lot of memory, explicit memory, right? But what trauma also does is trauma manifests as an implicit memory. It manifests as a feeling in your body, right? That's what an implicit memory is, right? An implicit memory is something that's so deep, so unconscious, right? It manifests as a feeling, not as a thought kind of memory, right? But as we know, and as we've talked about here before, and I teach this to all of my students and clients, right, that there is a connection between what we think, what we feel on an emotional level, which is sort of the mental feeling, and what we feel on a physical level. There is a connection between those three realms of experience. And they all influence each other, right? There's no way that you're, so in other words, when you have a feeling in your body, right? And so for me, like let's say the feeling of a tightness in my chest, right, which is a precursor to my anger, right? And so when I feel that tightness in my chest, right, which might be brought on from seeing something that triggers an implicit memory in me, right? So maybe I'm watching a movie and I see something happens to a little kid, and that's something happened to me, and now boom, here I am, and I have this feeling. It's not like I remember, like, oh, when I was that kid's age, that happened to me. That comes later, right? Like at first it's a feeling, but it's an overwhelming feeling. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened to me? Right. And now the thoughts and the emotions get involved, and then it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how we wind up with like 2 weeks of having to kind of settle down my mind for 2 weeks and get to a place where I could even have this conversation. Right. And so this sense of grieving, right, again, this is something I never knew was there before. I never knew that it was like, I always thought that like my mother, the way that she would, she was aggressive with her physical discipline, but it was just spanking, it wasn't abuse. It wasn't like she hit me with a wire hanger. It wasn't like she, whipped me with a belt. It wasn't like she, poured hot water on me or something like that, right? Like I would see on after school specials, like that's what abuse looks like. My mom loves me. I never thought that she didn't love me. And that's part of the problem, right? Because how does somebody love you and also beat the crap out of you, right? And I never assumed that, like, I always assumed rather that the same, emotional stuff that my dad put me through and my mom also, like, that was stuff that everybody dealt with. I'm no special that way, whatever, right? And so you get these ideas that are, that it's just the way you are, right? It's not, you don't get this sense that it's because of anything that I had trouble keeping jobs, or, well, not trouble keeping jobs, but I had trouble keeping money. No trouble making money. I had trouble keeping money. Have abuse issues, substance abuse issues, health issues, weight issues, eating issues, workaholism, all that stuff, right? You come to understand that it's just the way you are. And it's just, hey, tough luck. I guess you're a loser. Too bad for you, right? That's literally what I used to carry myself with. But once I started learning how to practice self-compassion and the mindfulness, I honestly believe that the last 10 years have prepared me to be able to face this. And facing it has initiated a grieving process, right? Because what I'm facing and what I'm seeing is a little boy who it wasn't fair what happened to him. It wasn't right. It wasn't okay. And it really did cause all of these problems, right? It's not, it wasn't a me thing. It was a trauma me thing. It was my trauma thing. And so looking back on that, it gets really, really hard sometimes, just in the same way that, when you're grieving someone, right? Like there are days, like if you've lost someone, and my wife is right now going through this. Her father is in hospice care in Canada, and she's about to fly up there to basically say goodbye to him, and, and she's really struggling with it, And to me, it's like, of course I understand the struggle and I support her through it and everything like that. But to me, it's like, darn, by the time I was like 8 years old, I had already lost 2 grandparents who I was extraordinarily close with. My father had already walked out on us. And, and then through the years later, I lost several personal friends, like, my age friends and stuff, whether it was to overdoses or accidents or violence, I couldn't name them on one hand. There's double digits, and so it's really interesting how we all kind of process these things differently, right? So this is something where I have seen loss, and I've seen death, and I've seen, upsetness about that, right? And so I know that when we are dealing with that kind of loss, right, that it's a process, right? Now, of course, there's like the 7 stages of grief, right, where it's you can go through all that psychology and stuff, and it's all valid and everything. I mean, it really is that way, right? But effectively, what it means in our lives, right, is that there's going to be times where the grief is manageable, and it's like, okay, I can get out of bed and I can do this. But there are other times where the grief is just really overwhelming, right? And you need to call in sick to work, and you need to just lie around in bed and just cry all day. And that's very much what I've gone through over the last couple of weeks, right? But again, now here's the thing, right? A lot of times in our society, we feel like, oh, but I don't have time to grieve, right? I gotta get going with things. I don't have time for this in my life, right? Well, the reality is that, number one, to push away from it is first of all not healthy. You're not honoring your memory of whatever you've lost or whoever you've lost. You're kind of dishonoring all that by not allowing yourself to feel the grief, right? But the other thing is that it's like trying to run away from your shadow, right? You ain't gonna escape it. Not permanently, not ultimately. And in one way or another, it's going to come out, and it's going to hurt you, and you're going to have to deal with it, right? Like they say, you could pay attention to your health. You could choose to pay attention to your health today, or else an illness is going to force you to pay attention to it later, right? Grief works the same way. And so that's why I think it's really important for us in a mindful and self-compassion context to see grief as something that needs to be honored, right? Like if we're feeling grief, like you got to roll around on the floor and cry and really feel it. Like if that's what you're moved to do. I'm not saying that you got to roll around on the floor. I didn't roll around on any floors, but I did get under the covers for hours and hours at a time. Right. And I allowed myself to just feel it. Right. I didn't say to myself, okay, you got to get over this. And there were a couple of clients who I had to still meet because they're going through their thing too. And I have a responsibility to be there for them. Right. They are counting on me to be there to support them through their whatever it is that they're struggling with, right, in terms of mindfulness and helping them through their helping them figure it out and figuring out how to apply mindfulness and compassion and self-compassion to grow through what they're going through, right? That's a responsibility I have. But I showed up with tears in my eyes. I showed up saying, hey, this is what you're getting today. This is art today. And it was some of the best meetings I've ever had. Right. And I guess to that extent, I could have come here and done a podcast and, done a crying podcast. Maybe I'll try that next time and see how it goes. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you all this to say that, first of all, I'm sorry, really sorry. And secondly, that I'm really happy to be back, even though it's felt very awkward and I really haven't covered anything yet, and it's 23 and a half minutes and we're going to cut this a little short today because I think this is about as complete as it's going to get today. But yeah, I want to say thank you also. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your forgiveness. And thank you for your willingness to stick with me. All right. I'll be back again tomorrow. Every day this will get a little more comfortable. I'm starting to feel the juices flow. I'm starting to feel a little excitement here. So hopefully tomorrow I've got my my blue book has been man, I mean, I have been journaling over the last couple of weeks, so I've got lots to share when the inspiration moves, okay? And so hopefully that'll start happening tomorrow. All right, everybody, I wish you well, and I'll be back again tomorrow no matter what, and I'll see you then. Take care, everybody. Thanks again.